Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. My Car, submitted by Tristan O. This is a messed up story that happened to me in the late 80s. My name is Tristan, but my friends call me Tris. I know, kind of a girly name, but my parents are off the boat from England. Anyway, my dad was a car enthusiast and was an engineer for a major auto company that I won't name. I also got into cars at a young age and became a mechanic, and when my grandfather died, he left us all a substantial amount of money. My parents made me save most of it for college, but when I was 16, I was allowed to use the money to buy my first car. I was in love with a Buick Grand National, and I had enough money to pay for a T-Type in 1986. If my mother had known more about that car, I'm sure she would have said, "No way are you buying that." For those of you who don't know, at the time, the Buick Grand National was the fastest production vehicle made. I'm not going to get into all the specs that only motorheads would enjoy, but I did a lot of modifications on it, and also did my fair share of illegal street racing. I know, young, stupid, with an unbelievably fast vehicle. What a mix. But here's where things started to go creepy. I met a girl who I had not really known growing up, but met her at a school event. She was not really like me at all, kind of a badass chick that ran with a completely different crowd than me. She was very, very pretty, and I was kind of taken aback that she liked me. I mean, we were just very different, but somehow we clicked. Or so I thought. We did all the normal dating things, movies, dinners, dances, stuff like that, and we would drive around and make out in my car and go a little further. The first incident happened when we were parked in a local park, just making out and talking. I noticed this red pickup that kept driving by the secluded area we were in, and if I can explain it, we were parked next to a pavilion off of the main park road. It was kind of like a loop with the pavilion on one side and a big field for gatherings or whatever. We always went to this one because it was kind of in the back of the park and not a lot of people usually were there. It was easier to have sex knowing that no one was ever going through that turnaround. But, like I said, I noticed this red pickup kept driving around the loop. I asked her if it was her father or something and maybe he was checking on her, and she said no and that it was no big deal, I shouldn't pay attention to it. As the evening turned into night, we had to leave the park, and I heard a tap on my window. There was a guy there holding up a knife, and I yelled out, "Holy shit!" I looked at my girlfriend, and there was another guy at her door. She didn't say anything, and I immediately just hit the ignition and floored it out of there. When we got to the main road, I saw the red pickup parked off to the side. It didn't take a rocket scientist to figure out the two guys came from that vehicle. Well, like I said, if you're not familiar with it, the Grand National was a pisser, and it didn't take long to get out of the park. There was no way in hell those guys would ever have a chance of catching me. Once I hit the open road, I put my baby through her paces and was long gone. The funny thing was, and I didn't notice it at the time, my girlfriend never said a word until I started hauling ass, and for the first time, she told me that I should slow down. Normally, she loved the thrill of being out on the country roads with me doing well over 100 miles an hour, but now she was asking me to slow down? I did, and realized we needed to just call it a night because it was a school night. So I took her home and went back to my house and parked my car in the carport next to our other two-car garage. I babied that car and always covered it at night, so I quickly put the cover on and then walked down the driveway to the side door of my house. Right before I got inside, I looked up and saw what I believed was the same red pickup that I had seen in the park. We had floodlights in the backyard at that time, and the reason that I mention that is later that night while I was finishing up some homework, those lights went on. My bedroom was in the back of the house, and a window overlooked our yard. When the lights went on, I looked up instinctively, but I also knew that deer passing by or other animals sometimes set the light off. Hell, if my dog had been out there, he would have activated the light. but my dog was right next to me on the floor. So when I looked out the window, I saw two guys standing next to my car, slowly pulling the cover off of it, but now looking up at the floodlights, realizing that they had been busted. I can't say for sure that it was the same guys from the red pickup, but come on. I mean, give me a break. What are those odds? So I jumped up, and I know I'm going into too much detail, but I remember stepping on my dog's tail, and him waking up with a yelp, which attracted the attention of my dad. He came in and asked if everything was all right, and I said, no, there's two guys out by my car. My dad had a number of vehicles at a different garage, but for whatever reason, he had his Alfa Romeo Spider in the garage at that time. His daily driver was parked on the street, and we realized that this was not a good thing. We tore down the stairs and out the side door, but the guys were long gone. I told him what had happened earlier in the evening, and I thought it was the same guys, and he said we should call the police and file a report even though there wasn't anything they could really do. He just thought it was a good idea. We did, and that was all that happened with that. Before I went to bed, my phone rang next to my bed, and it was my girlfriend. She said she just wanted to say goodnight, and I told her what had happened, and I thought it was the same guys from that pickup. She didn't say anything and said, hey, as long as your car is okay, everything is fine. I mean, she did love riding in it, but I think she was always kind of jealous of it too. I know this sounds like that movie Christine, but I wasn't that obsessive about it. But for whatever reason that night, it just seemed like she didn't want to hear anything about my car. About 2 weeks later, we were going to go to dinner in the movies. We left the restaurant and we got to the parking lot of the theater. And as soon as we got there, it dawned on me that she really hadn't said much through our meal and was dead silent on the way over to the theater. The minute that we pulled into a spot, a gang of guys basically surrounded my car. I mean, I knew there was something up at this point. I mean, there was way too much going on to think anything else. There was no one in front of me as far as other cars, and I hadn't yet stopped and put it in park. But one of the guys did get in front of it. There were two guys on the driver's side door and one guy behind me. I mean, my head was on a swivel, and I was trying to make sense of what was happening. I moved my car into neutral and just revved the engine, while the guys on my side of the car told me to get out. There's no way in hell I was getting out of my car, and I thought revving the engine might make everyone take a step back. It did make the guy in front a little nervous, but he just kind of backed up a bit. I mean, God, I remember this so clearly. Again, I'm going to mention here that my girlfriend had never said a word and was still not saying anything. So I figured, okay, these assholes need a little smoke show, and that's what I gave them. I lit up the tires and filled the area with smoke and then hit the horn to let the guy in front know that I was going in his direction. While the two guys pounded on the side of my car, I let my baby rip and the guy in front jumped out of the way. Thank God. I blew out of there as fast as my baby would go. When I got to the edge of the parking lot, my girlfriend screamed at me to stop and said, I just want to get out of this car. I looked at her and said, are you nuts? Those guys are crazy. And she said, no, just let me out. She said she was breaking up with me and just wanted me to leave her alone. I said, no way, I'm not leaving you here. I'll take you home. And all the way there, despite her hitting me and calling me all kinds of names, saying how I was a piece of garbage and she didn't even know I was with me, I didn't say a word. I pulled into her driveway. She got out, and at that point she was crying. I was so pissed and offended, and just for fun, and also being a dick at that point, I lit my tires up again in her front yard and then drove over to my buddy's house. When I did that, a lot of lights went on in all our neighbors' houses, wondering who was that guy. When I got to my pal's house, I told him what had happened, and we snuck a couple of beers out of the fridge and sat in his basement, and I told him about everything that had been happening. I was so taken aback that she had broken up with me like that, and out of nowhere. I mean, I couldn't figure out what the hell was going on, and where were those guys coming from? Well, that was a Friday night, and by Monday, the buzz was all around school. You know how things are, and you know how people talk. It turns out this girl had been wooing me in an effort to get her real boyfriend to get to my car. He was an older guy. I was 17 at that point, but this guy was like 22 or something, and she basically had been doing everything to set me up so that he could steal my car. I know I don't have any proof of that, but that was the story, and she never talked to me again, and to be honest, I don't ever recall seeing her at my school for my senior year. I know to this day I believe that's the truth, and I think that's really what happened. Thankfully, no one bothered me after that, which is another reason why I think it's true. If that guy and his buddies knew that the word was out and what had happened, I'm sure they would never mess with me or my baby. I got another girlfriend and spent the rest of my high school days fine and still doing a little street racing, but not as much. I mean, people around town knew my car and me, but I wanted to keep it that way, and I didn't want to showboat or show it off to anyone. I still have that vehicle, as well as 2 other Grand Nationals. Nowadays, I just use them to drive, and I have one that is strictly a show car that doesn't go anywhere other than the car shows. I would tell you the model, but I'm sure no one would care that it was a 1987. I love your channel, and thought this was appropriate for Valentine's Day, as I know you sometimes do shows about crazy people. I suppose this isn't as scary as a lot of the things you get, but as much as I think back on all of this, during this stuff, it was really scary to me that knowing that I put my trust in someone who I was completely vulnerable towards, she still did what she did. And it goes to show you, it's not always the right thing to do to put your trust in people. They can stab you in the back pretty easily. Online dating? Never again. Submitted by Lisa and the Cult Slam. Okay, this one's a doozy. I was in my late 20s and started dating a guy I'd met on a dating site. I know, how cheesy to have to actually go on a dating site because none of the guys I was meeting anywhere that I went were worth my time. If that makes me sound like a bitch, then I'm a bitch. We chatted online and then moved to texting, and then decided to meet in person. He seemed like a really awesome guy. We both had a lot of interests, like exercise and the outdoors and that sort of thing. So I was really happy to find someone that I knew I could go riding bikes with, or go on hikes, camping, and all that kind of thing. For this story, I'll call him Jim. We met in person at a Starbucks and really had a good time. We spent the best part of that evening just drinking coffee and talking, and I was impressed. He seemed to be a very smart guy, witty, and had a great personality. We made plans to go on a bike ride that weekend, and I was really happy with the way things were working out. We did go on our bike ride and then went back to the Starbucks. We decided to keep dating and did so for about 2 months, and we spent a lot of time together, always in the evening, but always doing fun outdoor activities that we both enjoyed. And once in a while on the weekends we would do something new, and one of the things that he introduced me to was paddleboarding. But one night, after I hadn't seen him for a couple of days, I texted him and said, "Hey, let's grab a coffee if you can." He texted back and said he couldn't do it until after 8 o'clock that night, but he would meet me at the Starbucks we always went to. I got there and sat down and was just playing around on my phone before he got there and sat down. For whatever reason, he looked a little off, and I asked him if everything was okay, and he said, "Yeah, sure," smiled, and then just started talking about other things. I needed to use the bathroom, so I excused myself, but when I came back out, there was another woman standing next to Jim. She was not happy, and she was screaming in his face. I stood watching for a minute, and then went over to see what the fuck was going on. This woman turned around and slapped me in the face, and then started crying, saying that she was sorry. I was totally confused. This woman just slapped me in the face and then said she was sorry, and then she just stormed out of the Starbucks. Jim just looked at me, and I said, "What the fuck was that?" That's when the woman came back in, storming the entire time, with keys in her fingers. She took another swing at me and then took a swing at Jim. I kind of fell back onto my butt, so she missed, but then she jumped on me and started pounding me with her other hand that didn't have the keys. By this time, Jim had jumped up, and other people from the Starbucks got in and pulled her off of me. The police had already been called, and I was just not knowing what the fuck I was supposed to do. I mean, Jim hadn't even said a word up to this point. Well, here's what happened. Jim had been living a double and almost triple life. He was married and had a family of 4 kids, and also had a previous wife with 2 other kids. Neither of those families knew anything about this until the woman from this current relationship found out and brought it to light. He had left his laptop open or something, and she had seen the contact he had had with me and did a little deeper dive. Now here's the scary part on my end. After all the police reports were filed and I was checked out by paramedics to see if I was okay, I went back to my apartment, and hanging from the doorknob to my place was a bag. In it was what I was finally told was a cow heart with a giant spike through it. Jim's wife had found out where I lived and left that there for me. Then she came to the Starbucks. How she found out we were there, I'll never know. But that's when the assault took place, and I'll have no idea how long that woman had been following us around, but I shudder to think what might have happened had things not gone to the head the way that they had at the coffee shop. What else could she have done to me if she knew where I lived, knew where I hung out, and maybe Jim wouldn't be around to step in? I never again went online dating, and I will never ever recommend it to anybody. I have no idea what happened with Jim, and I really don't fucking care. All I know was that I was in fear for my life. Even after up to a month after that, I was wondering if that woman was going to come back to find me someplace else. I mean, if she was willing to attack me in a public place and do something that creepy at my apartment, what else was she capable of? It's been many years now, and I try not to think about it. A Guy Named Ron, submitted by Tara. Hey, Uncle Jay. I wanted to share this story with you. I haven't told this to too many people. I mean, my good friends and family know about it, but it's not something that I ever really bring up in conversation as I got older. I hope you read it. Just before my 18th birthday, I was hanging out with my friends and my boyfriend at this little memorial area in our town square. It was a small place with some plaques to honor the people from our town who passed away in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. It was just a place where us kids would hang out, and the cops would eventually come and say we had to leave when it got dark. We knew that, but we would always push the buttons of those guys and would always stay past the time we knew we had to. And I think as much as it might have irritated them, I think they found it funny too. One night, I was there with a bunch of my girlfriends and some of their boyfriends, and this other guy was there that I had never met. I'll call him Ron, it's not his real name. He apparently was friends with one of the guys that was there and quickly took a liking to me. He was very handsome and very nice, and we talked a lot about school and what we were going to do as far as college and that sort of thing. He didn't go to the same school as us. He was going to an apprentice program, I do remember him saying that, and you'll have to forgive me, this happened in the late 90s. Looking back, I realize how immature I was, but I liked this guy immediately and didn't say anything to my boyfriend, even though, through the next couple of days, I was sort of going behind his back to hang out with this new guy, Ron, between my days at home and my job at McDonald's. Ron was super nice, and we had a good time hanging out. And by this time, maybe 5 days later, my boyfriend realized what was going on and immediately broke up with me. And that was it. No drama. We just walked away from each other. And I'm sure that he had more than a few choice words to say, but either way, that was it. Over the next month or so, I started seeing Ron more and more, and eventually started a romantic relationship, if you know what I mean. It got to the point where as soon as my shifts at McDonald's were over, he would come pick me up in the parking lot in his car, and we would immediately go someplace to have sex. This went on well into July. The funny thing is, we never went to Ron's house, and he never really talked about his family. As a young woman, I never stopped to think that this was weird, as I was always talking about my pain-in-the-butt brother and sister and my parents who were finally not being too strict as they had been for most of my life. I guess I was so focused on going off to college and looking forward to that freedom I knew would be there, that I never once stopped to think about who Ron actually was. One night, we were hanging out in that memorial park, and Ron wasn't with me. It was just a bunch of us young people hanging out, smoking cigarettes, and doing the stupid things that young people do. Just before it got dark and we knew the cops were going to come and kick us out, Ron came running up. He was covered in sweat, and as it was in summer in the South, it was very hot out, and I was wondering why he was running like that. He sat down and was catching his breath, and I was asking him if everything was okay. Where was his car? Why was he running? He didn't answer immediately. He just sat there catching his breath and said that his car broke down and he wanted to be here and see me, so he just ran from where he left his car. Again, being a young, naive kid, I didn't see how that was weird at the time. I just rubbed his shoulders, as sweaty as they were. Ew. When it got past dark, of course, one of the cop cars came, cruising by to tell us that we had to beat it, and we all got up laughing. But this time, the officer got out of his car. That had never happened before. I mean, usually when they came over to give us the business, they would just pull up, maybe ask about where we got our cigarettes and that sort of funny thing, but this time it was different. Ron immediately tensed up and jumped to his feet. The cop told him to stay where he was and to not move. And it wasn't like on TV where the cop pulls out his gun and says, "Freeze." It was just this man, looking at my boyfriend of sorts, saying, "Don't move." I looked at Ron and said, "What's going on?" All of my friends had kind of moved off to the side, so it was just the two of us sitting there. The police officer said, "Young lady, on your feet. Get away from him." I once again looked at Ron and said, "Ron, what's going on?" And he said nothing. The officer told me again, and I said, okay, and I moved off to the side, still staring at Ron, wondering what the heck was happening. I remember the officer saying something into his radio while standing next to Ron, who was not saying anything. The next thing I knew, 2 more cars pulled up, and all the cops got out of their cars. One came over and started asking Ron all kinds of questions. But that only went on for a couple of minutes before, next thing I knew, they had Ron in handcuffs and put him in one of the cop cars. At this point, I started yelling, "What are you doing to him? Where are you taking him?" And one of the officers came over to me and told me to be quiet and to just go home. But first he wanted my name, address, and phone number. They also asked the same things for all my friends. Again, as a young kid who didn't really know much about the world, I gave him the information and did what he told me to do. I went home, crying. When I got there, I called my best friend, who also was at that scene, and she had seen everything that went down, and we talked for hours about what was happening, and we couldn't figure out why they had stopped Ron. The next morning, a police car pulled into our driveway, and my mother saw it and called to my father. We were actually just getting ready to head out on a vacation trip, so everybody was just there packing up our things to get ready. My dad went to the door, and the police officer spoke with him for a minute, and then my father called to me to come out onto the porch. We all sat there, and the cop began asking me all kinds of questions about Ron. I mean, a lot of them I couldn't answer because I just didn't know. But the one that hit home was if I had sex with him or not. My father looked at me and said, "Be honest. I'm not going to be mad, but you need to tell the truth." I did and said, "Yes, we've had sex." The cop wrote something down in his notebook and then asked, "When's your birthday?" And I said, "It's not until September." He shook his head and said someone else would be back to speak with me and my parents. My dad told me to go inside, and they talked for another minute or two before he came in. Of course, he was mad, and I got the tongue lashing of a lifetime. And my mother was really upset that I had done what I had done. And then I got the interrogation of a lifetime about who this Ron guy was, how I met him, why they had never heard about him before, why I never brought him to the house, and so on. I remember crying a lot and being sent to my room, even though I was almost 18. I could hear my parents downstairs talking, and I still remember that feeling that I was in such deep shit, and that my parents were so mad at me. Maybe they wouldn't even let me go to college. About an hour later, my mom came into my room, sat down and talked to me in a much calmer way. She asked me if we had been having protected sex, and I said yes, and she said, "Well, I'm happy to hear that, but your father is very disappointed in you. We're going to have to work through this." We still ended up going on our trip, but it was a very difficult one. My dad didn't speak to me the entire time, and it was just like that Dirty Dancing movie. Wow. At the end of the trip, my dad did take me on a walk and said basically the same stuff that my mother had. The bombshell was when we got home. Turns out Ron was not my age. Ron was 28. Ron was also a felon. How he became friends with one of my friends, I'll never know. But it looks like he was pretending to be a much younger person than he was. He had befriended some of my friends, and they had accepted him as just another guy from the town over. He had already done a stint in jail for statutory rape, and was now looking at the same thing, because I hadn't turned 18 yet. I don't know all the ins and outs of the law, and outside of having to talk to the police a couple of more times and some other officials, I was never called to a trial or anything like that. But that night that Ron ran up to us at that little memorial area, he had just tried to rob a liquor store, and that's what brought the attention of the cops down on him. When they saw that he was hanging out with a bunch of teenagers, obviously bells went off. I know he did jail time, but I never followed up with anyone about it. I just wanted that embarrassing part of my life to be over. And I assure you it was embarrassing enough when my friends found out. I was the talk of the town. So I went off to college, tried to put everything behind me, but it did make me a much wiser person, and after that I was not so trustful of everyone who came into my life. But to lose your virginity to a guy who was basically doing something he knew he shouldn't be doing, and was taking advantage of a young, stupid girl, yeah, having to live with that is not the easiest thing. My advice to all young women who listen to your channel is be careful who you hang out with. Be careful with the choices you make. And always make sure you know who you are going to sleep with if you choose to do that, which I also don't recommend until you're older, wiser, and more mature to handle it. So, wherever you are, Ron, let's never meet again. A True Ghost Love Story by Nozomikizumi. This is a personal account of a ghost story that occurred over 10 years ago. This true experience firmly supported my theory that our departed loved ones can convey messages through dreams. Back in 1989, being a fresh graduate of psychology, I landed a job in the personnel department of one of the government offices in Quezon City. A male coworker, Jin, was 11 years older than me. He became one of my friends while working there. Jin was kind, loving, and romantic, and he was the breadwinner of his family. His parents and relatives liked me a lot, and being single and unattached, he courted me in 1990, and I accepted his marriage proposal during the later part of that year. My parents did not approve of our relationship, and when the first quarter of 1991 came, my parents made me quit my job. My dad, being a military man, even threatened Jin to stay away from me. And to make a long story short, I left my job. I lost track of Jun, and I busied myself with the family business. Basically, I went on with my life and tried to forget about him. On the morning of June 2nd, 1994, I received a telegram from his aunt saying that Jun had died the day before. Shocked, I crumpled the short note and hurriedly phoned his aunt for confirmation, and she told me that when we parted, Jun resigned from his job and started drinking heavily each day. He neglected his health as well as his body, and pneumonia came and caused his sudden death. She said, "You know, Jun, every day up to his remaining hours, all he wanted was to see you, and during his final moments while suffering from delirium, he even told us that he still loved you very, very much." Sadly, my parents wouldn't allow me to go to his wake. I just mourned quietly inside my room. There even came a point where I convinced myself that he wasn't dead. In January 1995, just before my birthday, Jun visited me in a dream. I dreamed that I was inside a hospital room, and I was wearing a hospital gown, and I was sitting at the foot of my bed. Jun suddenly appeared before me, clothed in bright light, and we communicated mentally. I told him it wasn't true that he was gone, and he replied that I must accept the fact that he was already dead, but it didn't mean that he was leaving me. "I will always be with you. I will always be beside you, guarding you," he said. I cried, saying, "I'm sorry I didn't have the guts to fight for our relationship." Jun comforted me and soothed me by shrouding me with his bright light, and the bliss I felt was interrupted by a voice calling his name. "It's time for me to go," he said. "What about me?" I asked, tears in my eyes. "I will always be here for you. Always," he replied. "And I will be waiting for you there. And don't ever forget that I love you very, very much." After saying this, he vanished before my eyes, and I woke up crying. After this incident, I finally accepted his death, and whenever I'm depressed, I feel his presence beside me. I know somehow, somewhere, out there, he's still waiting patiently for me.
The Date by Wild89. I went on a Tinder date a couple of years ago, and everything started out relatively normal. We met at a nice downtown restaurant for dinner, and she was even prettier in person, and the conversation was flowing. However, it didn't take long for me to realize she was a super private person. For example, she wouldn't even tell me her last name, where she worked, or say anything about her family. She made it clear that she was protecting herself, and honestly, I don't blame her. I shrugged it off, and the date continued. She took great interest in the fact that I was in seminary studying to be a pastor. And that was nice because usually it's a deal breaker for most women, at least in my experience. Towards the end of our meal, she confessed something to me. "I have something to tell you," she said, "but please don't think I'm crazy." I braced myself for whatever she was about to say. She explained that she recently moved into a new apartment. She lived alone, which was also a new thing for her. Though she couldn't put her finger on it, she was convinced there was a presence of a sinister and paranormal nature in her apartment. She had hardly slept since she moved in because she was plagued with constant nightmares and strange occurrences. I could see the fear and exhaustion in her eyes, and she seemed quite sincere. "I can tell you're a good guy," she said. She elaborated that I seemed trustworthy and had a calming presence. "I know how this sounds, but would you please come home with me tonight? Honestly, I'm just scared to go back there alone, and I am not looking for sex." I was taken aback by this. It's not every day I get asked to spend the night with a beautiful woman who I just met. I figured she was either telling the truth or she picked a really odd way to initiate sex. Either way, the night would be interesting. We talked for a bit longer, and I agreed to spend the night with her. I followed her home, and when I walked into her apartment, I was immediately struck with bad vibes. There was just something ominous about this place. I didn't want to freak her out, so I kept these feelings to myself, said a quick prayer, and followed her to her bedroom. She wasn't kidding about the sex. I tried my luck, but was met with swift rejection. We kissed and cuddled for a bit, nothing too crazy, and then she fell asleep. I just laid there for a while in the silent darkness, lost in thought. A little while later, I heard someone walking down the hallway outside the bedroom. The door was closed, however, so I couldn't see anything, and I was definitely frightened, but my curiosity got the better of me, so I went to investigate. Slowly I opened the door. I looked to my left, then to my right. Nothing. I walked downstairs to check out the rest of the apartment. Nothing. I went back upstairs to check the bathroom and the guest bedroom. Nothing. When I walked out of the guest room, which was right across from my date's bedroom, I looked to my left and right again. At the end of the hallway, I saw a black humanoid body standing there perfectly still. It was almost like a shadow, but I could discern that it was a three-dimensional figure. This figure was large in stature, and there's no way it could have been my date. She was 5'1" at best. I hauled ass back into my date's room. To my horror, she wasn't in bed where I had left her. I called out her name, but there was no response. I had just walked through the entire apartment, so it literally made no sense to me that she wasn't there. Her bed was low to the ground, so she couldn't be under it. The closet was open too, and it was packed with boxes, so I knew she wasn't there either. The window was shut tight, and plus it was the second story. It was as if she just vanished. I grabbed my wallet, keys, and cell phone and ran out of the apartment in nothing but my underwear. The shadowy figure was gone from the hallway when I ran by, and I jumped in my car and sped away. I never heard from her again. Her Tinder profile was deleted the next day, and she never responded to any of my texts. Till this day, I have no idea WTF happened that night. I checked the news and stuff like that, but never found anything. I also never returned back to her apartment, mostly because I'm horrible with directions and can't remember how to get back there. She lived in the next town over. Anyways, this was easily one of the most terrifying, inexplicable things I have ever experienced. The Loser at the Car Wash, submitted by 39 Aliases. First off, I'm a female in her late 20s living in a decent-sized town outside of Sacramento, California. This happened just 2 years ago, and it creeped the hell out of me. I came into a little money from a great aunt passing away, and bless you, Aunt Rachel, and I had been driving this old Chevy Cruze around for what seemed to be forever. I wanted something cooler and decided to get a new Mustang convertible, as obviously the weather around here is pretty nice. It does rain a bit, but only in the winter, really. So I planned to baby the shit out of this car and took it to get detailed every other week or so. Hand wash, full interior, the works. I mean, the thing was immaculate. I worked for a pharmaceutical company as a sales rep, and I was always concerned about how I appeared as a saleswoman. And once in a while I would take a client to lunch or coffee. If you're in sales, you know how it is. After about 2 months of this, a new guy showed up at the place I went to, and he seemed nice at first. But after a couple of times, he began seeking me out in their waiting room and asking me weird questions. And he thought it was funny to tell me that it wasn't really my car. It wasn't girly enough. In the beginning, it was amusing, but after a while, it was total creeper territory. So, eventually he gets around to asking me out, and I politely decline. But after the third time, I go to his manager and ask for another detailer from now on. I said that I know he does excellent work, but his prying into my life was making me uncomfortable. The manager was great about it, and said from now on he would make sure that there was a different arrangement, as I was such a good customer. I told my boss about it, and he laughed and said I was being too harsh and to let the guy have his dreams about me. Yeah, thanks for the support, boss. We were at his house having a barbecue happy hour with our sales team, and his wife said, "Well, you are pretty, but I know what you mean." One afternoon, I had just made my quota and then some on a Friday 2 weeks before month's end, and had actually picked up 3 new clients that week. My boss had just purchased a new Mercedes S550, and he knew I was into cars and wanted to take it for a spin. We finished our weekly meeting at noon, and he slid the keys across his desk to me. "Keep it under 120 and have it back here by 3, he said with a big grin. "Nice job this month. You're our best team leader, and I want you to know that." I couldn't believe it. I was so stoked and told him I would baby it and bring it back in perfect shape. I immediately called my friend Kendra and told her I was coming to get her for lunch, and she was surprised as hell to see me in that car. As we drove to a place to eat, she kept saying how amazing everything was. And don't get me wrong, I love my car, but this thing was unreal. We ate and she had to get back to work, and I thought, hey, I'll surprise my boss and get it detailed if they can fit me in last minute. I drove to my place, spoke to the manager, and the only guy that was available was the creeper. Oh well, it did need a huge once-over, just a vacuum, leather treatment, stuff on the interior. My boss waxed and polished it on his own, and I didn't want to screw that up. So about an hour goes by, Creeper comes up to tell me it's done. I give him a tip, and he asks me out again for the zillionth time. Again, I politely decline and tell him I have a boyfriend and get out of there. I went back to the office, and my boss was in a meeting, and I just wanted to go home for the day. So I left the keys on his desk with the top of the receipt and scribbled, "Thanks, she's better than when you last had it," with a smiley face on a post-it note. Some friends were getting together that night, and I thought no more of the day or the car. I was having a great weekend until my phone went off on Sunday morning. It was my boss. He had a little story to tell me. Saturday night, he was hanging out with his family and brother-in-law in his backyard by their pool when everyone went inside except for the two of them. They were talking in hushed tones about my boss's surprise birthday party he was going to throw for his wife, when they heard some rustling coming from the back part of the fence and some hedges. They stopped talking and saw a guy, totally naked, hop over the fence and crouch down at the edge of the yard looking at the house. My boss and his brother-in-law didn't move as they watched the person come up closer to the house. He got to the edge of the pool, they both jumped up and tackled the guy. Guess who? The creeper from the detail place. So after a quick thrashing and calling of the police, he got hauled away. He confessed to the police that he came across the car's paper registration in the glove box, didn't bother to look at the name, and thought that this was my address. Needless to say, we were all able to laugh about it as no one got hurt, and I never saw that creep again. Sorry, this isn't really a crazy relationship story, but I hope you share it anyway. Creepy Collector, submitted by S.J. Jones. After I graduated from high school, I started dating a guy that had gone to the same school. We hit it off nicely after first having fun and hanging out, and the usual couple stuff. But only after dating him for a few weeks, he bought a ring and actually proposed to me. I mean, what girl wouldn't like a nice new ring? But it seemed really off. It didn't take long after that for him to start drama with me, and instead of just breaking it off, I had caught him once fooling around with a mutual friend of ours in his room. Obviously, this made me upset, but he assured me that nothing else was going on. Clearly, I should have just ended it there, but it was only my second relationship, and I wasn't sure what to expect. One evening while he was at work, I tried to be a good girlfriend and help clean his room. We didn't live together, but I was trying to be nice. While cleaning out under his bed, I noticed a bunch of tiny boxes. Being the typical teenage snoop, I decided to take a quick glance. To my great surprise, these tiny boxes each had pictures of his exes in them. I quickly put these away and noped out of there as fast as I could. After this experience, we both became distant and eventually broke up. I just made sure to get my pictures back, so he wouldn't turn them into part of his Bluebeard like Creepfest. The Wrong Guy, submitted by Eerie Thing. I grew up on the south side of Chicago to a mother whose husband left her when I was 2. The cliche going out with some friends and never coming back bit. Last I heard he was somewhere out in Oregon, but I couldn't care less. He left and never once reached out to my mom, let alone me. Anyway, growing up was pretty rough. My mom didn't make much money, we were really poor, and she worked 3 jobs just to keep a roof over our heads. I spent a lot of time with my grandmother as my mom was working all the time, and sadly, for all her hard work, we never worked on our relationship, and I grew up barely knowing her. Even being in the same room with her in my high school days was odd. It was like she was an older sister I never saw. I did well in school and got a job at a popular convenience store chain in my neighborhood and busted my ass there every minute I wasn't in school. I became an assistant manager the summer after I graduated, and I was saving everything that I had. I just wanted out of Chicago. I found a manager job available in Austin, Texas a year later, and I called my boss to see if he could talk to HR and maybe give me a shot down there. I'd been recognized a couple of times for my work, and when I applied, the right recommendations were made, and the company said I was hired. It took me a couple of days to get all my stuff together, and I said goodbye to my grandmother and that I'd be back to visit soon. I let my mom know what I was doing, and she just nodded, hugged me, and told me to call when I got there. She knew it was time for me to give something else a shot, despite just being 20. For anyone thinking I was an idiot for just going, I had a friend I'll call Ann who was living there and was going to let me crash with her until I got my own place. We had grown up together, and her family moved there when we were sophomores. She bartended at a couple of bars down there, and that's how I met Glenn. Not his real name, just like all the other stories you read, I guess. Glenn was also a bartender, but he was also a musician. He played bass in a couple of bands around town and also helped other guys out with their bands. He was really cute, and I thought he was nice when Ann introduced us. I got into my work as the new store manager and put my heart into it, wanting to see if I could move up even farther, as I didn't want to go to college, but knew I could advance without a college degree with this company. One night, I was at one of Ann's bars and Glenn was playing. His band was good, and I thought he was really sexy playing. I mean, he had the long hair, the tight jeans, the whole rock and roll look. After a set, he came over to get a beer and said hi to me, and if I liked the band. I told him I did, and he said to stick around after the show. We hit it off that night and quickly became an item. And after a couple of months of dating, he asked me to move in as I was still at Ann's. I said yes, and he helped me bring my things over. Everything was great. My job was good, he was successful with his band, and even though sometimes our schedules conflicted, we were happy. I never had a really serious boyfriend before, so this was all new to me. But as my job started being more demanding, people quitting or changing shifts and me wanting to make an impression on my area manager, things started getting choppy. Glenn was getting angrier and angrier if I couldn't go to all of his gigs, and he would get sullen and come home drunk and either ignore me or bitch at me for not being there to support him. I always tried reasoning with him, and things would always calm down. Everything would be normal again until he decided I wasn't paying enough attention to him. One night, he came home and was pissed off, and his hands got away from him. He didn't hit me, but he grabbed me enough to shake me and scare me, and I took off for Ann's apartment. Sure enough, the next day it was another excuse, and I was a sucker and went back to him. That was a big mistake. A couple of weeks later, he had a gig where there was going to be a record rep in the audience, and he was very excited, and so was I. but the day of the show, a worker at my store quit, and the assistant manager's mom got sick. I ended up having to work a double and didn't get home until 8 at night, having worked 14 straight hours. I was dog tired. Glenn hadn't left the apartment yet, and when I told him I needed to sit this one out, he went crazy. He was yelling at me about how important this was, and I yelled back that I hadn't sat down in nearly 6 hours. He said that's it, grabbed me and dragged me to our bedroom closet. He threw me in, jumped out, slammed the door, and locked it, saying if I wasn't going to his gig, then I wasn't doing anything. I screamed and hit the door, telling him to let me out, but I just heard him gathering his things and leaving. I kept hitting the door and screaming, but I finally just collapsed with exhaustion and fell to the floor crying. I was so tired, I just fell asleep. When I woke up, I was on our bed and looked at the clock. It was 5 a.m. Glenn was asleep beside me. I got up to go to the bathroom and he muttered, "If you leave, I'll find you." He didn't say anything like he would kill me, but I knew what he was implying. By this time, Anne had moved to New Mexico, and I realized the only people I knew down here were work folks. I was so overwhelmed, and yes, young and dumb in many ways, and I stayed with him. One day I was home alone and was putting some clothes away, and discovered something about the closet door. If it was locked and you pushed up on it a little bit, it would become unlocked. I knew there was no way I would have enough time to make an escape after or before work because our schedules overlapped, and that just wouldn't work. So I hatched an escape plan. I inquired as to jobs back in Chai and talked to my area manager about me going back home. My old store manager had quit and there was a job opening in the same store. I explained all about Glenn, and she said she'd make some calls. A couple of weeks later, my transfer was approved. I called my mom and asked her if I could come home with her for a little while. She was totally different than when I left her. We had barely spoken during this time, and she hadn't told me about a new guy she had found and how she was hoping to surprise me at Christmas when I came home. She burst into tears and said she was sorry for the shitty life she gave me and all kinds of stuff like that. I cried too and told her about Glenn, and she said come home now. So my plan? I began quietly boxing up my stuff slowly so as not to raise Glenn's attention. Then, on my last day at the store, and the day of another one of Glenn's big gigs, I faked having to work another double, told him I couldn't go, and predictable Glenn did exactly what I thought he would. He pushed me into the closet, and I faked being scared and angry, and yelled and fighting him all the way. He locked the door, and I kept up the big show of hitting the door and screaming, and then I heard him leave. I waited a half hour, did the trick with the door, and it worked. It opened right up, and I ran into the kitchen to get garbage bags. I ripped open drawers, throwing all of my clothes into the bags, and rushed to my car and just jammed everything I had into the trunk, the back seat, and the front seat. I was just trying to move as fast as I could. I got the hell out of there and called my mom and told her I was on my way to Chicago. She was happy and told me to drive safe and to keep calling her to update her where I was. I was planning on driving halfway through the night and was feeling so liberated. Right on cue, I was about 2 hours north of Dallas and my phone started blowing up. Glenn kept calling and texting and then calling again. I didn't answer any of them. I just kept driving. I got home a day and a half later, changed my number, met my mom's new boyfriend, and they're married now. I started my job, and man, I'm now a regional manager with 2 college degrees. A lot of things have changed over the years. Looking back, I made some really stupid decisions and thought I knew what I was doing and everything when I really didn't. The one good thing I did remind myself on my drive home was that Glenn didn't know where I was from in Chicago and only knew my mother's maiden name. There was no way he would ever find me, and he hasn't in 9 years. Hey Glenn, wherever you are, let's never meet in another 1,000,000 years. A Bad Breakup, submitted by Lexi's Midnight Runner. So around Valentine's Day of last year, I decided that my relationship with my boyfriend wasn't working out. We were both 17 and very into athletics at our school, but I was also in band, student council, honor society, and other things. He was a one-track mind football, basketball, baseball guy, and that's not his fault and it's not a bad thing. He just focused on that and not on me or anything else. I'll refer to him as Paul as I don't want to embarrass him. We had been going out for a year and had been junior prom king and queen, and after I found out I was being offered a scholarship for tennis and academics, I was planning on going to college a few states away, and he started being a jerk, so I said enough. There was a big Valentine's dance at my high school, and we were supposed to go, but seeing as how we weren't together anymore, I stayed home to just relax and watch a movie. All of my friends were going, so I made popcorn and settled in for the evening as my parents went out and my older brother was at a party at a bar with his friends. I was watching a movie but also playing on my phone at around 10 o'clock when I got a text from Paul. He was once again asking why we broke up. I blew it off and he texted again. And again. I finally gave in and just told him it was over and that he needed to move on. I did it in the nicest way I could and had handled the breakup the same way. I went back to the movie and then my phone rang. It was Paul. I let it go to voicemail, but he called back. Voicemail again. Another voicemail. Then he called again, and I answered it, and this is as close to what happened as I remembered.
Paul, this has to stop.
Why won't you talk to me? Sighing, I said.
Paul, there's nothing left to say. Please, just let it go. We had a good time, but we both need to move on.
A good time? You said you loved me, and you just drop everything just like that, like I'm a piece of garbage?
Please, we've been down this road 100 times. Let it go, Paul. Let's just be friends and not do this anymore.
So you could just be friends and all chummy with someone who's gone down on you, someone who's held your hair back while you were throwing up after a party? This is such bullshit.
No, Paul. What we're doing now is bullshit. I have to go. Let's just be friends, okay? I don't want to remember you this way.
Who is he?
Who is who?
Is he there right now?
What? Paul, what are you talking about?
Are you home?
Yes, no, Paul. I'm gonna hang up now. Goodbye.
I'm coming over.
No, you can't. Don't. I'm not there.
Tell him he's dead. And he hung up the phone. I just sat there wondering if he was really going to come over. I called my friend Jenny, but she didn't answer, and I remembered she was at the dance. I got up and went to the front door to make sure it was locked, and then went back to the living room in the movie. For some reason, I turned off all the lights. About 15 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text. It was Paul asking if I was home. I replied no, and he texted back saying, "That's funny, I'm looking right at you." I froze. I slowly turned my head to look at my living room windows, and there was Paul staring in, looking at me. I scrunched up with my mouth wide open. I'm an idiot, and I texted him to go away. I watched him read the message and text back, "Why don't you just open the door so we can talk?" I got up and ran to the front door, and he did too when he saw me move. I forgot I had already checked the locks, but he ripped open the glass storm door and started pounding on the other door, yelling, "Open the door, Lexi, I just want to talk to you."
No, Paul, please, just go home. Leave me alone.
"Lexi, open the door."
Paul, I don't think you...
"Open this goddamn door." I stepped away from the door and I heard the storm door shut. I was on the verge of tears and was starting to dial my mom when I heard a noise at the back of the house. I looked down our hallway to the family room where there was a set of French doors that went out onto our back deck. I made a move to get to them, but then stopped short. Paul was standing there at the doors, and my eyes zeroed in on the deadbolt lock. My heart dropped. It was unlocked. There was no way I could get there fast enough to lock it. Instead, I ran upstairs to my parents' room. On the way, I heard him come in and yell out, "Alexis, come down here and talk to me." I went into my parents' bathroom and closed and locked the door. I tried calling my mom, but she didn't answer. I tried to call Jenny and some other friends, but no one answered either. I called my brother, but again, he didn't answer. I was starting to cry, and I heard a soft knock on the bathroom door. "Alexis, are you in there?" I sat on the tile, totally silent. "Alexis." "Look, you fucking cunt, open the door or I'm coming through it."
Paul, please stop.
"Open the door."
Go away.
"You dumb bitch, always doing shit the hard way," he said and started pounding on the door. He kept ranting and yelling at me. Then my phone buzzed in my hand. It was my brother. His text said, "Little sister, don't you know the front door is locked?" He always said "Little sister, don't you know" to me like the Elvis song. I was shaking and told him the back door was open and I was in trouble in the bathroom. He wrote back, "Got the shits, huh?" Paul was still banging on the door and yelling at me, and I texted back, "Paul is in here and he's scaring me. Open the door, Lexi. Just open the fucking door."
My brother's home and he's gonna kick your fucking ass.
Sure, just like you weren't home, you bitch. Then there was a loud thump at the door, and I heard my brother's drunken, slurred voice say, "The fuck are you doing in my house?" I heard Paul stammering out gibberish, and then a knock at the door. "Kitten, are you in there?" Another stupid nickname of his. I cried out yes and unlocked the door. In my parents' bedroom was my big bro, and I practically jumped into his arms. I remember him smelling like beer, and then I looked over at Paul, who was being held by two of my brother's rugby friends. Oh, I didn't mention that my big brother is 6'5" and plays rugby. "Take him outside," my brother said. "Lexi, no, I love you. I know you love me," said Paul. "Please, Lexi, please." The guys dragged him away, and my brother hugged me and told me to go to my room for a few minutes. I did and texted Jenny, tears streaming down my face. My brother came up after a bit and told me everything was going to be fine and to come downstairs. His friends were sitting around the kitchen table laughing and drinking beer. Billy, a carbon copy of my brother, handed me a beer and said, "We took care of it," and they all laughed. The next Monday I saw Paul at school, but from afar, but I couldn't miss his black eye and cast on his arm. That night when I told him my brother was coming was the last thing I ever said to him. P.S. My brother calls me Kitten because of that Bugs Bunny cartoon with the bulldog that loves the little kitty and puts her on his back. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but that's why. You don't have to put that in the story. Well, I did, because I know exactly the cartoon you're talking about. Thanks for submitting. High school wacko. High school was a tough time for me. My family moved from upstate New York to suburban Charlotte, North Carolina. I was very shy, and I had a hard time adjusting to the change. One day I had to take a test, and I struck up a conversation with one of the other students. Before I left the room, he gave me his phone number, and after that there would be almost daily visits to the computer lab, and he would spend a large amount of time telling me how pretty I was and holding my hand. I was young and shy, so I relished the attention, and I was too naive to see the red flags. I was part of an anti-drug campaign run by the school, and I often found him hanging out in a crack between a wall and a vending machine, waiting for me to walk by on the way out of the meetings. One time, he even followed my mom around a shoe store and just looked at her. Looking back on it, this is a very clear sign that something was amiss, but I just didn't see it at the time. Fast forward a few years. I moved back to New York, and I'm living with my family while I was attending college. One day, I got a phone call from a North Carolina number, and it was the same guy. I'll be honest, I had just gotten out of a very complicated relationship, and this one phone call turned into communicating with him either through text or phone call every day. Eventually, we made plans for him to come up here to New York to see me. I had honestly started to think that the weird things that had gone on in the past were just things that awkward teenagers do. But the minute he got here, he right away started pushing boundaries. He insulted my appearance, telling me that I should become a vegan so I could lose weight, despite me only weighing 90 pounds. He said I should also drop out of school as my degree was going to be worthless. I know it sounds like he was just being mean, but it actually gets weirder from here. He got very grabby, and I would tell him to stop, and then about 5 minutes later he would start that crap again. I felt obligated to see the week through, even though I was getting more and more uncomfortable. I didn't want to be alone with him, so we never left my living room, and were always within earshot of a family member. And here's where it gets really weird. One day, I told him that I wanted to be alone, so we made a compromise. He brought over his computer and hung out in the living room with me while I read a book. I happened to be reading a book about a well-known murder. He told me that must explain his erratic behavior, and that he thought about throwing things at me and made jokes about tying me up and raping me. I made the mistake of getting in a car with him, and he almost drove off the road when the radio station we were listening to began to crackle. At the end of the week, he proceeded to propose to me, telling me that he would make good money and how he could go out and travel the world while I would sit home in a pretty dress and have dinner ready for him when he got home. But he also said he hated children and animals, so we couldn't ever have any of those. I was dumbfounded, and all I could say was, "You need to go home, dude." Well, he went home, but after a few weeks he called me and threatened to kill himself. He would also go into detail about how he was going to accomplish it. He told me everyone would blame me and that I would go to jail, or that his family would harm me in retribution. Things quieted down for a while until one day he called me out of the blue and told me that he lost his job and was undergoing counseling because his boss felt threatened when he came at him with a sharp object. In case you're wondering, we no longer speak. He is on my block list. This might not be terrifying, but it's definitely one of the scariest things that has ever happened to me. Dude, if you listen to this and you put the pieces together, I want you to know that I hope you get the help you so desperately need. Who was Kate? Submitted by My Name Isn't Chris. I'm going to preface this by saying this is hard for me to talk about, and only my family and a couple of friends know about it. I don't give a flying fuck if no one believes the story. That doesn't matter. I lived it, and it still lives with me. I like your channel a lot, but this is the first and last thing you'll ever hear from me. When I was in my early 20s, I had broken up with my college girlfriend of nearly 5 years and found myself back on the dating scene. Obviously, it had been a while, and even though my friends tried to hook me up with other people they knew, or even we both knew, I was determined to find someone on my own, come hell or high water. I did the bar scene, but everyone knows how that goes. Mostly just one-nighters every once in a while. I want to point out right now that I wasn't just jumping right back into things. It had been nearly a year since I had been seeing anyone seriously. Finally, I bit the bullet and tried a dating site. I won't say which one. There were a few matches with people my age, and I did go on a few dates, but nothing really grabbed my attention. All of the women were nice, just not really my style. I was talking to my friend, I'll call him Sam, about things over a beer at a bar we both went to a lot. He was getting married that fall, and this was springtime, and he kept telling me I could hook up with the bridesmaids I'd be walking with. I laughed and said, no, I really want to find a cool chick that was into what I was. Music, working out, etc. Dude, if you're not getting results, expand your age range, he said. Look, if I want to fuck a cougar, I can do that tonight, I replied. No, asshole, he said. Go up to 29 or 30 and see what you get if you're sick of 22-year-olds. I thought about it for a while, and we threw some darts, talked about his bachelor party that was coming up, and then we went home. Back in my apartment, I stood looking at my computer and said, fuck it, what do I have to lose? I opened my dating profile at the website and changed my age preferences to 32, had another beer, and then went to bed. After work the next day, I went to the gym and then jogged back to my apartment, made dinner, and then looked to see if I had any matches. There were a lot more, and Sam was right. So I showered, grabbed a Mick Ultra, and looked over all the profiles. A lot seemed to be a good deal, but one jumped out at me in particular. It was a blonde 30-year-old woman. Before making a rash decision to reach out to her, I sat and asked myself if that was a bit too big of an age range. I mean, I was 24 and just starting my career. I was a copywriter, by the way, but I was trying to get myself into a freelance career as I was already sick of sitting in a cubicle all day. I threw caution to the wind and sent her a message. And just like that, Kate came into my life. She messaged me back later that night, and we went back and forth asking questions about one another. Our hobbies, likes and dislikes, jobs, the standard first-time shit. Something came up on her end and she had to take off, but asked to chat on the phone the next day rather than go back and forth on the computer. We exchanged numbers and said goodnight. I had another beer and called Sam and told him what was up. He told me to go for it after asking if she was hot or not. I laughed and said, yeah. He asked, hotter than Jackie? Jackie was a girl I dated before the last girlfriend, who was really pretty, but this Kate was way hotter. She's a part-time model, man, I told him. And I got the standard meathead, dude! And then I asked him to play racquetball that weekend. The next evening, I gathered my courage and called Kate. She answered and we talked for over an hour. More of the same banter as before. She was a corporate translator for a computer company in town and spoke fluent French and was also a part-time model for photographers in and around the city. I told her I knew a little French, and she switched over to it, and I started laughing with my stupid, incorrect responses. She laughed too. Finally, I said, "Look, do you want to get a coffee or a drink this weekend if you're free?" "Sure, let's get a drink on Friday night," she replied. "Ever been to Rue 41? "Yeah, how about 6? She said great, and we said goodnight. I was on a cloud and was hoping that this would work out. Friday finally came, and I did my routine, showered, and walked to the place. It wasn't far from my apartment building. She was there when I got there, and I cannot tell you how freaking gorgeous she was. Honestly, first thing that went through my negative mind was, she's either cheating or she's crazy. But I shook her hand, and she wasn't either. We hit it off immediately, despite the age difference. We ended up getting a table and staying for dinner after another drink. She asked to get together over the weekend. She was having such a good time. Saturday was out for both of us, so Sunday brunch it was. I gave her a quick peck before she walked to her car, and I floated home. Next day was a barrage of questions from Sam, and I told him how stoked I was. This is like the longest intro ever, I know, so I'm just going to skip ahead a couple of weeks. Kate and I became a thing, but we weren't having sex yet, just spending a lot of time together. Then, one night she invited me over to her apartment and said she'd make dinner. I was all in and very impressed with her place. She lived on the top floor of a building in what everyone called the Old Village. We had dinner, and then we're going to watch a movie, so with wine in hand, we sat on her couch together. Like I said, even though we weren't kids, we were both taking it slow. Slower than usual, I thought. But we started making out, and then things progressed from there. And that's when she surprised me. While we were half naked, she scratched her nails down my back as we kissed, and I mean scratched. She actually drew blood. I popped up and she said, "Oh, sorry, Chris, I stood up and wiped the back of my hand on my back, and it came back with blood on it." "I'm really sorry," she said. I got carried away. Let me get something to clean that up." She went into her bathroom and came back with some gauze and stuff. I was still in shock and a little pain, but seeing her approach me with her face and that body, I put that pain out of my head pretty fast. Now here's the weird part. Before she took care of my back, she licked the blood off my hand. What the hell was that, I thought. She asked me to spend the night and that she would make up for hurting me accidentally. I said yes, and she sure did make up for it, and that's all I'll say about that. Afterwards, I fell asleep next to her in her bed. And when I woke up, she was looking at me and told me she had to tell me something. "Chris, I hope this doesn't ruin anything, but I have to tell you something." "Okay," I replied. "There's no other way around it, so I'm just going to say it. The reason I'm not with anyone is that they all run away from me after a while." "Okay," I said again, wondering where the hell this was going. "I'm into BDSM stuff." And Kate looked away and she said, "You probably think I'm a freak." I thought about it a minute and I said, "No, I don't. I'm not going to lie, I don't know about all that stuff, but that's not chasing me away." She turned back and asked, "Would you ever try it with me?" I paused again. "Well, I guess I could, but nothing really crazy like that German porn shit I've heard about." Kate laughed, and in hindsight, that's when I should have really just laughed and gotten up and left. But I didn't. I just figured she was into that 50 Shades of Grey nonsense that was going on at the time. We saw each other a lot over the next few weeks, and one night ended up at her place again. She brought some wine out from the kitchen, and we talked on the couch, but I started feeling beyond buzzed. I remember looking into her eyes, and then everything went black. I don't know for how long I was out, but when I woke up, I felt like total shit and my head was throbbing. It was dark, and I went to put my hand to my head, but I couldn't. I tried my left hand. Same thing. "Oh," I heard Kate say, "you're awake." That's when I realized what was going on. I was tied down to her bed with a blindfold on, and I immediately panicked. This was fucked up and not what I was looking for at all. I tried to speak, but there was something covering my mouth. She took the blindfold off and was standing over me holding a knife in one hand and a candle in the other. There were candles all over the room and this weird poster or blanket on the far wall with a bunch of symbols on it. She started saying all this stuff that sounded like gibberish to me, and all I could do was struggle. Kate took the knife and pierced my naked thigh and dragged it down to my knee, leaving a thin cut. Not so deep as to need stitches, but plenty of blood, though. I tried to scream, but she just wiped her hands in the blood and then put streaks of it on her face. She moved to the other side of the bed and did the same thing to my other leg, putting more blood on her. I mean, I was completely spazzing out now. Was I going to die? Was I going to be torn to pieces? Kate started doing this chanting thing again and drank something out of a glass that looked like wine but was thicker than it. She straddled me and put the knife on my chest, and I tried to scream and scream, but nothing came out but muffled noises, and she made an X on my upper right pec and pinched it to make more blood come out. Then she leaned over and licked it, smearing it all over her mouth. She sat back up and kept this chanting shit going and held the knife up, and I knew this was it. I'm fucking dead, I thought. But she shouted more stuff, and then stopped. Kate looked down on me and smiled, and I'll never forget that bloody face and grin as long as I live. She put the blindfold back on me, and I smelled something funny and was out again. When I woke up, I was still in that bed, but not tied down. I took the blindfold and tape off my mouth and looked around the room. There was nothing and no one there. No candles, no weird poster, and no Kate. The places she had cut me were bandaged up and not bleeding anymore. What the fuck was going on, I thought. I slowly got up, my legs burning a little, and I saw my clothes in a chair in the corner next to an empty chest. I gingerly pulled on my stuff and peeked out into the hallway. My legs were on fire. My chest hurt. But out in the hallway, it was like nothing had changed. I went into the living room and everything was still there. The only things that were gone were Kate and her stuff. My head hurt a lot, but I knew I had to get out of there. I looked at my watch, and it was Monday afternoon. I'd gone over there on a Friday night, and it was now Monday. Grabbing my shit, I got the hell out of there and called a cab home. I didn't feel well enough to walk. My phone was just about dead, but there were a ton of missed calls from Sam, my dad, and my work. I got home and took a shower, which I later found out was a stupid move, and I called work and told them that I was so sick that I had slept all day. I then called Sam and told him to get over to my place quick, and he showed up with his fiancée, and I told them everything. He laughed and said I was full of shit, so I took my warm-up pants down to show him my legs. Holy fuck, Chris, you need to call the police. And that's what I did. Right, I'm going to wrap this novel up now. Kate didn't exist. I mean, she existed, but no one knew who she was. There was no record of her at the company she said she worked at. Not one photographer knew who she was or recognized her, and the dating site only confirmed that her account was made at the ISP of the building, and that's the craziest part. The apartment was actually the guy who owned the building, and he had been in Arizona on the other side of the country from me for the last 3 months recovering from an illness. The investigation went on for 3 years and is still ongoing, but I don't think as heavily as before. It's like this woman just vanished and moved on to the next schmuck like me that will fall for her act. I've been in therapy ever since, and I'm just starting to get over my trust issues and actually see women again. Writing in the gym are all that's in my life. As I said at the beginning of this, I don't care if any listener doesn't believe this. They can blow me because it's all true. You wanted a fucked up relationship story, Uncle Josh. You got one. Uncle Josh note. This is only the 3rd time someone has sent me something and I've replied to follow up with a story and have the email bounce back. Food for thought.
Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you would like to hear narrated on my podcast or this channel, email it to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. And of course, this is just a taste of what's coming up. If you have a true scary Valentine or relationship story, send that over ASAP. Please like, share, and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. If you'd like to take your support a little farther, find me on Patreon. A link to that is in the description below. Follow me on social media, links to that are also below. And everyone, be excellent to each other. Until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.